Welcome to Master of the Game Sports. Today we're going to be talking about the college football playoff. We're going to be talking about the seeds. We're going to talk about what I thought they should have been, what they are, which are obviously two different things. And we're also going to talk about what I think some of the rules should have been going into this and other things related to the college football playoff. We will also preview what I think Michigan's chances are to win the college football playoff. So we'll also give you the predictions of the scores and the games. First, I want to talk about the rankings in college football. Now, I was fully expecting Alabama to be number 1, Michigan to be number 2, Georgia 3, and Cincinnati number 4. I knew that's what it was going to be, although that was not what I thought it should have been. I thought they should have went with Michigan number 1, Alabama 2, Cincinnati 3, and Georgia number 4. So we would still match up with Georgia, and then Cincinnati and Alabama would still play. That's what I thought it should have been, following the guidelines of Georgia being in. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't think a team should ever be in the college football playoff if they have not won a conference championship or they're not undefeated. So that, to me, rules Georgia out, just because they just played against Alabama, and I think you should not be able to have two teams from your conference in the college football playoff. Now, that would have allowed another team to move in. Well, you would say, oh, well, that should be Notre Dame, because clearly they didn't lose a conference championship, but they did not win one. And they do have a loss on their record to Cincinnati. So I don't think Notre Dame should have been allowed in as well. I actually think they should have put in the Big 12 champions with Baylor. I think Baylor should have squeaked in as the number 4 seed. Then you would still have, you'd have Baylor, you'd have Cincinnati, Alabama, and then Michigan at number 1. Michigan plays Baylor round 1. You would have then had Alabama, Cincinnati, and then the winner of those games, in the championship game. That, to me, would have been the best way to do this. This is the best way to get representation from across the country. This also gets rid of the SEC versus SEC championship games that we've seen quite a few times. And, overall, I think would just be a better experience. Obviously, they weren't going to do that. I knew they weren't going to do that, so it doesn't matter. And they're even discussing right now changing to a 12-team playoff in the future. The only hang-up is deciding if all conference championship winners should be in the playoffs or not. So when it comes to that, I originally thought we should have an 8-team playoff where the 5 power conference champions are in and 3 at-large bids get in. Those could have been anything, right? And so the way I would have done it is the 5 conference champions are the first 5 seeds. And then when it comes to the 3 at-large bids, if you have any undefeated non-Power 5 conference players or conference champions, they should go in. So, they're undefeated, right? Cincinnati would have been one of those teams. Now, you could take Notre Dame because of a 1-loss deal. Or you could take one of the SEC teams, so in this case, Georgia. And you could take Ohio State, right? So those would have been your 3. You would have had Notre Dame, Georgia, and Ohio State vying with Cincinnati, right? Those would have been the 4 teams for the 3 at-large bids. Ohio State would have been on the outside looking in because they have 2 losses. Notre Dame has 1 loss, so Notre Dame would have probably been in. Georgia, 1 loss would be in, and then Cincinnati. So again, you'd still have a great college football playoff. You'd have, Baylor, Michigan, Alabama. The Pac-12 champion was that Utah? I think that was Utah. And so you'd have five conference champions, and then you'd have those 3. It would still be very intriguing. I think this would be the most interesting format, in my opinion, just right there. I don't know what they're going to do for the 12, but I still stand by the fact that you should have the 5 Power 5 in. That leaves 7 at-large bids. Should a 1-loss Notre Dame get in? Maybe, the thing that bothers me about that is Notre Dame can get into a big conference. They can play in a Power 5 conference. They could probably keep their television deals if they wanted to. They're just not willing to do it. They have been invited, I think, to the ACC. They've been invited to the Big 10. I think they've even been invited to the Big 12. They could play in the Pac-12, SEC. I'm sure any conference would love to have them. But again, they are choosing not to join a conference. And, that's their right. They can do what they want. But I honestly don't think a Notre Dame team that has losses on their record, when they get to piecemeal their schedule without having to go through, a conference, should get a chance every year with one loss or two losses. I just don't think that should be possible. If you disagree with me, I'd love to hear about it below. I do think teams like Ohio State, heck, on some years when you have three really awesome conference teams like the SEC sometimes has, when they had LSU, Alabama, Georgia, they had some other teams, all really good. I think they should have been able to get two teams in this 12-team playoff in easily. But I think you got to draw the line at a certain point. You can't allow just everybody in, right? So do you draw the line at 3 teams? Because I still think that's too many. But there should be some sort of restriction in how many teams from one conference can make it in. And I still think if a team is not undefeated and they don't play for a conference championship, again, they shouldn't be allowed in. Or if they aren't a conference winner. So that's kind of it. That rules out a lot of the smaller schools. That rules out, the Notre Dames if they're not undefeated. So I think that's the best way to do it. Or, yeah, there you go. Power 5, boom, winners. And then the next 7 are all just based on the highest ranked team. And then you seed them by the conferences. And then those are the top 5 seeds. And then you sprinkle in the at-large bids after that. Because nobody wants SEC teams in the finals. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants Big Ten teams in the finals. If it's just them versus themselves, they don't want that. I mean, is it cool for me as a Michigan fan to get like a revenge game against like Ohio State in the championship? Sure, that would be awesome. But I still don't think the rest of the country would want to see that necessarily. Now, maybe in 2006 when Michigan and Ohio State were number 1 and 2 going into the final game, maybe then they'd want to see that. Or maybe a few years back when J.T. Barrett was a yard short and the referees gave them the first down. Yeah, maybe that year they would have wanted to see that as well. But most of the time, I don't think you're going to want to see a rematch in the championship of all of college football. Just my thoughts. Now that we've got that out of the way, what I thought should have been the rankings is I thought Michigan should have been number 1, Alabama number 2, Cincinnati number 3, and Georgia number 4. That didn't happen. They ended up going with Cincinnati at number 4, Georgia number 3, Michigan number 2, and Alabama number 1. I don't know why they wanted to make sure that an SEC team was number 1. They got their wish. They did what they wanted to do. It is what it is. Now, when it comes to this, my brother-in-law was asking me, does Michigan have a chance to beat Alabama? To which I had said, I think they do. But first they got to get through Georgia. Because there was no way that we were going to see Alabama and Georgia face each other again in the first round. Some say they want an all-SEC championship game. I don't necessarily believe that. Well, I think some do in the committee. I do think there's a portion of them that hopes one of them loses. And so you do get an SEC team in the finals beating somebody else. That's what I think they want. But, yeah, who knows, right? When it comes down to it, looking at the teams, what their strengths and weaknesses are, who they've played, who they've beat, things like that. Let's start with Cincinnati. The reason we're going to start with Cincinnati is they're ranked number 4. Now, Cincinnati is not a Power 5 conference champion. They won the All-American Conference, I believe, and they're a good team, like really good. And for years, that has been, out of the smaller schools in the country, has had really good coaches come through there, from Brian Kelly, Jim Tressel, I think Mark D'Antonio was there. Like, they've had a lot of good coaches come through there. They're always a good football program, always, for a smaller school. They always put out, challenging teams that can really battle the bigger teams. They've upset a lot of teams over the years. But when it comes down to it, Cincinnati is not a powerhouse program. It's not like they're out there recruiting top 5 recruiting classes or anything like that. They're not getting the absolute best players in the country. They'll get a couple guys that are up there and some of the better players in the country. And they develop talent and all of that. They do a really good job over there. Luke Fickell, is a decent coach. He coached at Ohio State for a long time. My last memory, other than Michigan beating Cincinnati a few years ago, of Luke Fickell at Ohio State was us beating them in the year that he won like 6 games with Ohio State before Urban Meyer came in and turned things around year 1. Now, I don't know if Cincinnati can keep up with any of the other 3 teams in the conference playoffs or in the championship playoffs. I think they deserve the shot. They're undefeated. They did beat Notre Dame. So again, I believe they've earned it. And I would love to see them upset Alabama. I don't think it's going to happen. I think Alabama is just too good. Now, when you look at Cincinnati statistically, supposedly they're good against the run and things like that. But again, they're usually playing with a lead. They can pass really well. They're a really good offense. They leave it all out there. And so I think when it comes down to it, Cincinnati's not going to beat Alabama. They're going to get trounced. And I say that because watching Alabama versus Georgia yesterday was surprisingly not difficult for Alabama. When the game started and I was watching, I was like, wow, this Georgia front 7 looks amazing. And real quick, Alabama exploited certain things. They exploited guys on the defensive line who get winded after a couple plays. They exploited the fact that if you can get past those front 7 and throw crossing routes, 15 yards down the field and stuff like that, they can exploit you if you do not have the talent on the back end. Their defense shut Georgia down, So again, Alabama to me, great team as usual. When it comes down to it, in order for Cincinnati to beat Alabama, they are going to have to pull out all the stops. They are going to have to get, and I don't think you can get Alabama over pursuing as Cincinnati. I think Alabama's going to stay in their lanes. They're going to play good fundamental football, play within themselves, and beat Cincinnati. Because, again, they've got the Heisman, I think the Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback in Bryce Young. And, they're just going to crush Cincinnati, in my opinion. Georgia. Watching the conference championship game, Georgia versus Alabama, started off, I was very impressed with their defense. And then they had a couple turnovers. They just fell apart throughout that game. I was completely surprised with how easily Alabama scored on them throughout that game, especially later in the game after things had gotten going. I saw glaring weaknesses. Their strength is their front 7. However, they have a kid at defensive tackle that when he went there was like almost 400 pounds at 325 or whatever they say he is now. And again, he's amazing. He is somebody I would love to have on Michigan. However, if you can run an up-tempo offense and keep him on the field when he's winded, he's nothing. He's just standing there. He does not push. He literally gives up on the play before the ball is snapped. And you saw it. He literally was stood up multiple times yesterday when Alabama went up-tempo to keep him on the field. You can exploit that. He's just a guy on the field that has no business there after a couple of plays. So I think, again, Georgia, while their front 7 is amazing, their linebackers are fast, their defensive line is fast, I think if you can, again, if you can, I don't think it's easy by any means because Georgia has the best defense in the country this year. But if you can get to that third level and throw the ball where you need to, you can beat them. I also think, again, if you get some of those defensive linemen tired and you go a little bit more up-tempo, you can run the ball on them. But that is a very specific situation that requires that you have to catch them with a certain personnel package on the field and things like that. So we will see how Georgia responds to the ass kicking that Alabama gave them. But I think they'll learn from what happened and be more situational about certain things going into the playoffs, especially since their defense was exposed yesterday. No other team has exposed their defense this year. Going into that game, they were giving up less than 7 points per game. They are still averaging, only giving up 7 points a game. A little over 7. 7.5 or something. So all these hypotheticals I'm saying to beat that defense are just that. They're hypotheticals. One team did it. It could have been an off day for that whole team, something. But I think they were just exposed. And I think the game tape from yesterday is going to help whatever offense plays up against Georgia, which obviously is Michigan. So that brings us to Michigan. So in order for Michigan to beat Georgia, which I do think is very possible, I think Cade McNamara is an amazing quarterback. Now, our rankings do not prove that out when it comes down to it. I think we're, bottom half of the FCS in passing, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that we don't pass very much. I've got the statistics right here. When I look at passing statistics, pass play percentage, so how often we pass, is 113th in the country. We pass the ball 40% of the time because we run so much. And with that, though, our completion percentage is 36th in the country. Really good. Our yards per pass is 27th in the country. Really good. Again, passes per game, we throw it 27 to 28 times per game. Not a lot. That puts us at the 99th ranked passing per game in that regard. However, our passing yards per game are really not that bad when you look at those other numbers for how often we pass. We still pass better than a ton of teams that throw the ball more than us. So, for example, passing yards per game, we're at 228.1, and we are ranked 66th. So that is not bad at all. We don't turn the ball over very much. We are 34th in the country with interceptions thrown, and we give up hardly any sacks. We are number 2 in the country at giving up sacks. So when it comes down to it, we're talking about second, third down. We're usually playing with less than 10 yards to go on second down, usually playing with, third and short on third down. So our team, that is how we play. We will still come out and throw it sometimes on first down, but a lot of teams won't expect you to do that with how infrequent we pass. And so when we do, it's usually a high percentage play. It's usually well thought out, and having the full playbook there is wonderful. We've shown teams this year we're willing to pull out crazy plays, such as the flea flickers. We've done that multiple times. We've done halfback passes, like in the conference championship game as we beat Iowa. We are willing to pull out all the stops, end arounds, reverses, special teams. We do some crazy plays like that. So I think there's a lot of things that Michigan can do, and I think they're going to have to do that to beat Georgia. I think you could catch Georgia over pursuing and playing too aggressive, especially early on in that game. We saw that with Iowa a little bit yesterday. We saw that with Ohio State last week where they were a little bit too aggressive, so they got themselves out of position. And I think Michigan is a well-coached and established football team. Even though we're young, we play well in those situations when teams do that. So, and I think that comes down to coaching, good coaching. So again, I think that could happen. We saw that a little bit with Alabama and Georgia yesterday, where again, they played tight at times, especially as the game went on. They're not used to being behind. So if Michigan, again, this is the same thing I said about Michigan against Ohio State, if Michigan can jump out to a lead, there is a good chance Georgia will implode on itself just like it did against Alabama. They're not used to doing it. They play tight. They over pursue. They're overly aggressive. And it just doesn't work out for them. Again, I think Michigan could blow it open, but it's going to require them to come up with a solid game plan to start and, maybe a big special teams play or so to really get it going. And I think Michigan can do that. They've proven they could do it this year. The only team Michigan lost to this year was Michigan State, and Michigan dominated that game from a yardage standpoint and everything. They gave it up late in the game. They could not stop the run. Yeah, Georgia's a good running team, so it could cause problems for our defense, but Iowa was a good running team. Hell, Ohio State was one of the top teams in the country with yards per carry, and they still couldn't beat us. So if you can force a team to pass, then Michigan will win. So if Georgia's having to pass early on, just like we saw against Iowa, then Michigan's going to walk away with it. So I do think we can win. And we'll get into score predictions in a minute. Now, Alabama, clearly one of the best teams in the country. You have a Heisman candidate at quarterback. They're going to beat Cincinnati. And when it comes down to it, Alabama versus Michigan in the national championship game, that's going to be a tough game. I don't know if Michigan has played Ohio State, and Ohio State is a lot like Alabama from a passing standpoint. In fact, Ohio State is a better passing team than Alabama. And Ohio State had a better running back than Alabama. So then it comes down to their defenses. So Alabama's defense gives up 20 points per game. They're ranked 20th in the country. They give up 311 yards per game. They're 7th in the country at that. And yards per play, 4.5 yards per play. Their third down conversion is 7th, which also their yards per play is 7th. But their third down conversion, they give up 32% of third down conversions. So, again, really good defense. Now, let's go look at Ohio State, because, again, I think Ohio State is a very comparable team. They are. So, opponent points per game, 20.9. So, they're 23rd. Yards per game, they're 46, so they're not as good in that regard. Yards per play, they're 31st. They give up 5 yards per play. Their third down conversion, they're not very good. Ohio State isn't. They're ranked 93rd in the country. They give up about 42%. So their red zone defense is 75th. So I still think Alabama, again, is similar. Their red zone defensive percentage is 65th. So again, they're very comparable. The difference was really just in the yards per game aspect. But yeah, when it comes to rushing, this is not your normal Alabama team. They're only averaging 4 yards per carry. They're 79th in the country at that. And they run the ball only 47% of the time. Their rushes per game, they do about 36, and their rushing yards per game is 146. So Alabama and Michigan, match up really well for Michigan, in my opinion. In order to beat Michigan, you need to be able to run the ball down their throat. Now, Alabama has the talent to do it, but I do not think they will do it against this Michigan team. This Michigan team is well coached, well prepared. They have great leadership. Those kids are hungrier than any other group I have ever seen come through Michigan. And you could see it. They're out there clearly working their butts off. When you watch David Ojabo, when you watch Aiden Hutchinson, Ross, Hawkins, Dax Hill, all those guys are giving it 100% on every play, just pedal to the floor. They know where to be at any given time. I think throughout the whole Iowa game, we saw one mistake by Dax Hill, I feel like, on defense. Just one, and that was it. I don't remember seeing any really big mistakes by the Michigan defense against Iowa. When it came to the Ohio State game, again, like, we were blanketing those wide receivers. I think Ohio State's wide receivers are far better than what Michigan's going to see in the college football playoff, no matter what. Georgia and Alabama do not have wide receivers like Ohio State. And Alabama's got one of their key receivers out with an ACL injury now. I believe he tore his ACL in the conference championship game. So that also plays into the factor there. This is a good year for Michigan to win. I really think so. But it's going to be tough because I think Michigan has the toughest road. Michigan and Georgia have the hardest matchups when it comes down to it. I don't think Georgia can beat Alabama. Even in a rematch, I think Alabama would beat Georgia. I don't think they match up well. Because Alabama is able to exploit the third level. They can pass on them. Now, Alabama always has really well-coached secondaries. So looking at Alabama's passing defense, this year is not like Alabama defense. They give up a lot of completion percentage, yards per pass passes per game. Like, Alabama is... It's interesting. Their weakness at defensive passing, their weakness at rushing the ball. This is not a normal Alabama team. It's just not. And it's going to take Bryce Young to win it all. He could. He's the Heisman candidate that I think is going to win. Yeah. Now, when it comes to it, is there a chance someone else might win the Heisman? Maybe. I would love to see Aiden Hutchinson make it as a finalist. I don't expect him to win it, but it would be really cool to see him in New York next week, at least for the presentation, and at least in the talks. Now, when it comes to scores, I think Cincinnati and Alabama is going to be a high-scoring affair. I think they're both going to score a lot of points. I could definitely see that being a 32 to 48 point game. I don't think it's going to be I think it's going to be a very fun game to watch, especially if you like watching video game football, because I could see them going back and forth on offense a little bit. The difference is going to be Alabama is going to get a few big plays at some point in that game from a defensive standpoint. I think they have athletes that are going to be able to do that. I don't think Cincinnati can keep up with that. And we'll see if Alabama is also able to exploit certain weaknesses within Cincinnati. I mean, that's what I think it's going to be. So, who knows? Maybe Cincinnati stays in the high 20s and doesn't get into the 30s, but I think that's going to be a high-scoring game. Michigan and Georgia is going to be a very low-scoring game. I do think you're going to see Michigan is going to impose their will on Georgia. I think Georgia's going to score, 21 points. And by low scoring, I mean for these teams. Both of them score into the 30s a lot. But yeah, I think you could see Georgia get up to maybe 21 points, but I think Michigan's going to outscore them and probably do 24 to 28 points. And so if I have to put a number on it exactly, I think we're looking at, let's go 24-21 Michigan in that game. Just touchdowns, no field goals. I think Georgia could be held to a couple field goals, but we'll see. We'll see. Our red zone defense is really good. I'm not sure how Georgia's red zone defense is, to be honest, but their defense in general is stellar. So we'll see. When it comes down to it, I think Michigan's going to be able to catch them sleeping a little bit with substitutions, just like Michigan used to get caught with that. I don't think that's going to happen in the college football playoff, because I think that's one of the things they're going to work on, is making sure their defenders are where they need to be. One of the things I hate when I'm watching games, especially with Michigan defense in the last few years, is the defense not being set. I hate how they'll flip and mirror before the play. And the reason I hate that is because they always seem to get caught off guard and not be quite ready, and I hate that. And there's so much film on it with Michigan State. Ohio State did it. Iowa tried it, but that's just not their style of play. So that's one of the things I don't like very much. So, again, I think we're going to work on that. I think that's not going to be as glaring a weakness as it's been. But in the past, I've said that, and we went out into bowl games and big games, and that's been a problem. So, we'll see. But I think McDonald, our defensive coordinator, has got it under control. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on the college football playoff heading into it. I do think Michigan's going to beat Georgia. I think Alabama's going to beat Cincinnati, and we're going to have Alabama versus Michigan. Now, after the first round of the playoffs go on, I will come back. I will discuss the championship matchup, assuming Michigan makes it. If Michigan doesn't make it, I don't know if I'm going to dive into it. I might be too heartbroken to do another video like this with them not in the championship. But I think they'll be there. I think they can beat Georgia. So it's going to be fun to watch. As we get closer, if anything happens, I will do a video on it. If situation changes, I'll do a new video. And hell, as we get closer to the game, my opinions and predictions might change. And so when we get closer to the game, I will do a Michigan versus Georgia preview discussing both teams statistically and all of that. So this was Master of the Game Sports. We'll see you guys next time. Enjoy your games.